Hey, what's up? I'm Jason, and I've been developing games for about 15 to 20 years now. And over that time, I've worked with quite a few engines. But today, I want to explain to you why I switched away from Unreal to Unity and why I've never really considered going back or even switching to any other engine. So, at the time when I made my jump to Unity, I'd been working in Unreal in Vanguard, just up there. And I'd worked a lot in custom engines that we used at Sony for our own games. These were ones that were built in house on top of other libraries, but not an Unreal or Unity type thing. And a friend of mine called up and said, "Hey, I really want to start up this mobile game company." It was right around the time when the iPhone was just taking off, just getting big, and everybody was trying to get into mobile. And he called me and said, "Hey, let's make some mobile games. Can you leave? Can you come join me and do this? And we're going to kick off this thing. It's going to be great." And I thought, well, that seems pretty interesting. Seems like a lot of fun and seems like a big change and an opportunity to learn new things and just kind of become a better developer and move up and advance myself, right? And also just get to work with friends and build fun projects, which kind of what I was doing at Sony, but seemed like even more fun. So I decided, why not? Let's do it. I took the job, and the first thing that we had to do was decide on the engine. Now, at the time, I was really comfortable with Unreal, so I was thinking, hey, maybe we'd use Unreal. Maybe we'll find something else. But my buddy who was running this thing saw Unity and said, "Hey, why don't we use this? Can you check this out? See if it looks good. See if it'll work for us." Because it already supports mobile deployment. And at the time, nothing else supported mobile deployment. At least no engines that I could think of supported it. Unreal didn't. CryEngine didn't. It was really the only option for us. At least I didn't realize it at the time that it was the only option, but it was the only one that was available then. Of course, by the time we actually shipped, mobile deployments were available for pretty much everybody because we took way too long to ship. But that's completely beyond the point. The first factor that kind of pushed us there was the fact that Unity just has quick adoption to things. They got to mobile like a year before everybody else, and they got to VR probably about a year before everybody else. And they seem to get into these new technologies much, much faster. They're kind of rapidly evolving all around the place. Where a lot of other engines focus really heavily on a specific thing, Unity seems to kind of branch out and hit everything. So again, we're looking at the engine options here, and I'm thinking, hey, Unity seems like it's going to make sense because really it's the only one available and it's got the fastest adoption. So we know that when new things come out, it'll work with that. But I looked deeper and I realized, hey, we actually code in a slightly different language too. We'll be coding in C# instead of C++. Now, this might disturb people who'd used a lot of Unreal or were really familiar with C++ and only use C++. But in my day job, I kind of went back and forth. When I was working at Sony, I worked a lot in C++ on engine code, but I'd also work a lot on tool code in C# to kind of keep the things in line so that whenever we added something new to a game, we could also see it in the tools and let designers manipulate and change that stuff. It's a really important thing to do, and not a lot of people really liked doing it, and I loved it. So I would take on game stuff and tool stuff at the same time, kind of bounce back and forth. Sometimes way heavier on the tools, sometimes heavier on the games. But I was very, very comfortable with C#, and I liked the language. I thought, hey, this is kind of neat. I don't know how it's going to work for games because I'd always thought, hey, C# is too slow for games, right? You can't do that. But figured, why not? Maybe it's mobile games, maybe it doesn't matter. I didn't know at the time that I was crazy and that C# was going to be completely fine for games. I just kind of had it all stuck in my head from all my years as a C++ game programmer, right? So C#, this was really reason number two, or the second thing, beyond the fast adoption, just that the language is really, really nice. There are a lot of really cool features in there to make the code extremely clean, readable, and kind of easy to write. And it's a lot harder to shoot yourself in the foot. With C++, you can do pretty much anything you want, and you have a ton of power, but you also, of course, know that with great power comes great responsibility. It's very, very easy to mess up, make a mistake, and blow things up. The biggest problem I used to hate dealing with was memory leaks and memory getting overwritten. Occasionally, somebody would put in a bug, do something a little bit wrong, not realizing what they were doing, and memory is getting overwritten on the server, and things are suddenly acting very, very strange. Stuff crashes, stuff blows up, and all kinds of weird problems. Those things don't really happen with C# and Unity. You have different issues to deal with, like garbage collection. You have to avoid that, and it's kind of a special mindset you have to get into when you're doing game development in C#. But overall, I find that working in C# just makes it a lot easier to write good, clean code that's not messy and not broken. Of course, you can do that in C++, but I just find it easier to do in C sharp. Now let's go on to the next thing. It's also related to the way that we write code. Because we're writing code in C sharp and it's getting piled down in this other layer, we don't have long build times. When I worked in Unreal, and I worked on EQ2 even, no matter both the games, the build times were insane. And I'd say it's pretty common for an Unreal game or just a big C++ game where you have to recompile everything, including the engine code at the same time. It takes a long time. I mean, we would have half-hour to hour-long builds, and these are with IncrediBuild running on 100 plus processors all throughout the office. If you wanted to do a build at home, it could be like 4 or 5 hours. I actually set up an IncrediBuild cluster at home so I could build things and get my build times down to under an hour when I wanted to actually test out my changes. With Unity, I think you've all seen it. If you've used Unity before, you make your change, you tab back into the editor, and it's probably already done recompiling your change. You hit play, and it works. You can even change code while you're playing if you want. I don't usually do that, but you can, and it'll recompile and update, and depending on your project, even work. So fast build times and fast iteration is huge. I mean, on top of that, I can write unit tests in Unity much easier, and I don't even have to build sometimes, or at least I don't have to tab back in and build. But that iteration speed is just immensely faster. I don't know if I can kind of just emphasize this enough. So much faster. Having to wait half an hour for a build to see if my two-liner change was right or if it was wrong or if I messed something up, extremely frustrating. Having it be instant and just hit and play is awesome. So let's go on to the next thing. And that is the just sheer amount of resources available. So when I started with Unity, I have to admit, there weren't a lot of resources out there. There were a couple books. I went and bought all of them. They helped a little bit, but they didn't really go in depth. They kind of explained how components worked, how game objects worked, how to play sound, and I figured out the basics from those. But nowadays, there are just a ton of resources. There are books out there for just about anything you want to learn Unity related. There are YouTube channels like my own and lots of other ones out there that just are full of resources and tutorials and guides on how to build games in Unity. And there are blogs and web pages. There's just a lot of information out there. Lots of courses available. It's just amazing the sheer amount of information and resources available for Unity developers. Now, there probably are a good number of resources for other engines nowadays. I don't really look, but from what I've seen just in my brief searches, doesn't seem like it's anywhere near the level. Right? We're probably looking at 10 to 20 times more resources on Unity than any other game engine out there. And I think that that's also partially because it's free, right? Unity was the only engine that was free to start with, and it's really, as far as I know, the only one that's still free completely if you're not making very much money, right? If you're under 100,000, you don't even have to get the pro license, and if you're over that, well, you don't have to pay royalties. You just get your pro license. You don't have to pay royalties, and you don't have to go on like with this whole process of paying another entity. You might, of course, if you release to Steam or one of the app stores, you're gonna have to pay them, but that's gonna come out automatically from their cut. You don't have to actually send somebody a check. Um, and it's just nice and simple, right? So we don't have to pay extra royalties on top of stuff. It kind of simplifies the process and it just made it very, very easy to get into. And this kind of goes back to also when we were starting out, Unreal wasn't free, right? Unreal was an option, but we would have had to pay to start with it. Now they've made it free and available so that anybody can get in there and get started, but they still do have the royalty program. I don't know if they've cut that down though. Maybe they have a minimum on the royalties now. It didn't used to have one. It used to be 5% all the way, but that's probably changed. I mean, when I first started with game development, it was $1 million just to get started. So now it's free. Hopefully that's changed. But it is one of the things that I've loved about Unity, and it's one of the reasons that I found so many other developers out there, which is another one of the great reasons that I don't want to switch. There are a ton of Unity developers out there, and I think that it's largely because Unity was available for free for developers to learn on and to get better at. So we could start making games without a big upfront cost and without a big learning process, right? Really, you can get in and start making a game with almost no experience and kind of figure things out as you go along. I've taught fifth graders how to make games in Unity, and they're relatively proficient at it. It doesn't take much. If I tried to do that in Unreal, and tried to get them actually writing C++, I don't think that's going to happen. But getting them to write very basic C sharp and read some inputs and make things jump and shoot wasn't hard at all. It was actually surprisingly easy. So I think that that barrier to entry and the just the sheer simpleness of getting into there makes it so we have a ton of developers out there. And that comes in really handy. So if I want to hire new developers, there are a lot of Unity developers out there. If I want to just talk to other developers, there are a ton of them available. I can go out, reach out, and there's developers everywhere that I can ask questions. For instance, in the user groups, if you go to the Unity page, they have a giant list of user groups, and they've had that forever. Just these are meetups that people go to where they talk about Unity development. They teach each other, they learn from each other, share experiences, hire each other, get jobs from each other. No, it's great networking events, and these are really common for the Unity community. I haven't seen this so much in other communities. I've seen little groups pop up for other engines, but the Unity ones are just like worldwide. They're everywhere, and I really enjoy them. And I find that just that sheer number of developers really helps. I mean, if you look at the stats, there are more Unity developers than probably every other engine combined, and I would be surprised if it doesn't dwarf that number. Now, let's go on to one other thing that I really like, which is that they're constantly releasing updates. So they have very fast release cycles, doing what I think they're on like 3 releases a year now, but sometimes it feels like 4. I don't know. They release a lot and they're constantly adding new features. The features are available in beta and we can just go grab them and update. And it's not hard to update. So upgrading from Unreal 2.5 to 3 was pretty close to impossible when I looked at it. I'm sure somebody could do it. I certainly couldn't when I was looking at the process. Upgrading from any version of Unity to a newer one is usually pretty simple. Especially, I mean, going from 3 to 2019 might be hard, but going version by version isn't generally too hard. Now, if you go, of course, long jumps of 10 years, it's obviously not going to be the same. But if you're going, those incremental jumps are nice and easy, and it's easy to stay up to date with Unity. Of course, things can break, and if you're using some different, certain things, you can run into edge cases where stuff breaks. But I'd say 95, 99% of the time when I upgrade, I don't really run into issues. I can think of one time where I ran into a big frustrating issue, and it wasn't even a real issue. It was just an issue with a plugin that I didn't have time to address. So reverted back. So upgrades and new features, just amazing. Going into the package manager and seeing all of the cool stuff that they're working on, and just the responsiveness of the Unity developers, the team. They're really quick to add in new things that are requested and just kind of follow along with the community, which I really love. Another thing I really like is the ability to build non-game apps. And this might seem a little bit strange. Maybe you don't care, like, hey, I only care about games. But this is actually kind of important because a lot of developers that I know who work on their games part time, who are indie developers, they'll build these apps for hospitals or museums or whatever kind of place that wants some cool interactive application. Maybe it could be for kids or just for people to see something fancy and flashy. I mean, even in cars, I'm pretty sure they added Unity support for Teslas recently. Again, goes on to that whole early adoption. They get kind of everywhere really fast and first. But building these things helps a lot if you're a game developer who just needs to earn some extra money along the way because they tend to pay really well. They're very, very easy to do in Unity. If you want to build some sort of interactive thing that like pops stuff when you touch it or pops up some text or whatever, it's very easy to do in Unity and make it look very pretty in a really quick amount of time. So they're a really good way to just generate some revenue while you're building your game. I don't see that in any other game engine, and I think that you'd have to switch, from a game engine to something else to be able to do that. Maybe not. Maybe I'm crazy. I wouldn't, don't put it past me. I could be totally wrong there. But from what I've seen, a lot of really fast and easy to do apps are just done in Unity, and I look for them now. So when I go out to places, I go to like Disneyland, I'm looking like, hey, is this made in Unity? Can I figure this out? Usually I can't get into it, but I try to figure them out anyway because I think it's kind of neat. And then the final thing that I want to talk about, and it kind of ties into that, is that when we're talking about C sharp and we're talking about non-game stuff, there are still even more resources on how to write good, clean C sharp code, how to architect projects well, how to do the solid principles, how to just follow ways to keep your code nice and clean and keep it testable. A lot of those resources and examples are in C sharp. They're not really a many in C++ that I found. C sharp is kind of the language for that. C sharp or Java, just because those were the top enterprise languages when a lot of these things were getting done. Of course, now there's a lot in JavaScript as well, but there's still so much C sharp info out there that I find it really easy to get developers who understand the ideas behind having clean, maintainable code that's easy to work with for years, a decade later. And I didn't really see so much of that when I was working in C++. In C++, it was all about let's get it working, let's get it fast, let's make sure that it performs well enough. Maintainability was never really an issue. Of course, that's still just my bias on where I was, the things that I saw could be totally different somewhere else. But in my experience, just the fact that we use C sharp and the fact that there's so many good C sharp resources out there, you can go grab like I don't even want to list. Maybe I'll put a book list down below. There are a ton of them though. So I hope this list was helpful. If you're not sure what engine to use, I highly recommend you just take a month, spend it with Unity, go try things out, and just look through some of these things. Look for some of those user groups. Look at some of the resources. Grab a standard C sharp book. It's on clean coding principles, and just play around with it. See if there's some other opportunities out there. But definitely give Unity a try if you're not using it already. And if you're curious about other engines, go try them out. It's always interesting to see what they're like, see what their workflows are like, and what areas they do better. And there are always some spots that other engines are going to do better. There's never going to be one engine that's best at everything. But in my experience, in my opinion, Unity is pretty much the best at most things. And I don't see any reason to switch away. Now, if you have different opinions on this, you got thoughts about why I switch to something else, or some other thing that you think is missing from Unity, like visual scripting, for example, but they said that's coming soon and there are plugins for it. Let me know. Drop a comment below. I'm kind of curious to see what everybody else is doing, what you guys are using, and any kind of arguments against using Unity, any reasons that you would use a different engine. Like I said, I don't really dive into too many other engines anymore. So if there's stuff that's going on that I don't know about, I'd love to hear about it, and I'm sure everybody else would. Anyway, thanks again for watching. Thanks, special thanks to everybody on Patreon. Really appreciate it, guys. And oh, I forgot to ask, but don't forget to share the video, like it, subscribe, and tell everybody about it and all that fun stuff. All right, thanks again. Bye.